Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to jump a little further into this topic about hamstrings and the deadlift because there's a lot of misinformation here. So let's jump into this a little further. Now you guys know I discussed it yesterday in this video here, discussing Sebastian's debate with me, and then over here I did a video discussing more advanced powerlifting techniques for the deadlift and what I use. So that will clarify some of the points. And there's some points being made out there that people who have a very basic understanding of human physiology and biomechanics make, but they're not really correct because they don't understand that primary functions of muscle do not always determine what muscles are recruited in a movement. Now, the point has been made by a number of people that the glutes are more dominant than the hamstrings and hip extension. However, it has been documented for almost 20 years now and understood in sports physiology that hip extension is absolutely a function of the hamstring. The hamstrings are considered to be a primary mover in hip extension, even though the glutes are still involved. And the deadlift very much involves hip extension. Any type of deadlift does. Now we could get into the debate about things like the stiff leg deadlift or the Romanian deadlift because they're purely hip extension with minimal to zero knee flexion, that they do not recruit the biceps femoris effectively as its primary function. And that would be true that that is not the primary function of it, but when you understand the splashover effect or radiant effect of muscles, it should be clear to you that those movements still absolutely and unequivocally would activate the biceps femoris. They're not going to activate it as much as they activate the other heads, however. But the fact is, a muscle is being activated as a primary mover during a lift. Even though it has a head that isn't a primary mover, it still shares a common insertion at the very bottom, and that alone will cause it to contract and activate, just not maximally. And this goes back to a basic understanding of physiology. Now I'm going to discuss something further because people didn't grasp what I was saying in yesterday's video. I'm going to link me doing a deadlift here again. Now for those curious, that was 240 kilos I was working with beltless, or 530 pounds for those who don't use the metric system. Now one of the things you notice with that, I'm going to make the argument that a properly done deadlift like that absolutely uses knee flexion to get the weight started, and it absolutely recruits all heads of the hamstring, and it is very effective for the hamstrings for the initial part of the movement. And then the hamstrings are pulled out of the movement a lot more because of the fact that I'm using thoracic rounding. But the initial break off the floor, the hamstrings play a massive role in it. And they are maximally contracted, all heads are. And the reason is that you'll notice when I pull the slack out of the bar, I pull myself down. Because I'm actually pulling up with probably 400 to 500 pounds of force during the drop down to pull the slack out, I am putting a massive amount of tension on the hamstrings, and you will notice that I am still initiating, my hamstrings are contracted, and I am initiating just another inch, maybe more, of knee flexion as I break the weight off the floor. And that is the hardest part of the deadlift. The most force is generated on a deadlift during the first inch or two coming off the floor. That is where most of your force is generated. That's well understood. That is where your force has to be generated. You're producing a lot less force through the later part of the movement. And the hamstrings are fully engaged and in motion and tightly contracted during that. They are absolutely a primary mover, and knee flexion being involved is absolutely a primary function of the initial part of the deadlift with the type of technique that I use. And if you want to go back and look at it again, backtrack and look at it again, but a properly done deadlift where you use that technique that I happen to use, which is a very, very common technique among competitive powerlifters, absolutely is using knee flexion and all heads of the hamstrings as a primary mover during the initial part of the pull where the most force is generated and the most total tension is created. So to make the argument that the deadlift done in that very popular style is not using the biceps femoris or all the heads of the hamstring as a primary mover is just ridiculous. It's not logical. It doesn't display any understanding of the biomechanics of the movement or human physiology. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.